We'll get started here in just a minute.
Okay, so I will call the November meeting, October meeting of the Manitou Springs Planning Commission to order. First order of business, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Graybill,
I am here.
Commissioner Wilson,
Present.
Commissioner DeLay,
Here.
Commissioner Rosenthal,
Present.
Commissioner Storm,
Present.
Commissioner Day.
Present.
Okay, so next is approval of the minutes of the September meeting. And
I have some changes. Do we want to put them up for approval? Motion to approve and then discuss?
you can just put, give your corrections
Okay.
and make the motion.
On page 4, it has Commissioner Storm opposed short-term rental rules for ADUs. And it actually, I probably should read opposed short-term rentals for ADUs, not rules necessarily. I was against them being used as short-term rentals.
And I'll mention it has me as being present and I wasn't.
Okay. So was that a motion with those two corrections?
With those two corrections, motion to approve?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor? Oh, okay. Okay, Megan, and you voted,
To approve.
thank you. Okay, so move on. Next would be public comment on non-agenda items. If anybody in the audience would like to comment on something that's not on our agenda tonight, now would be the time. And I see no takers and anybody online.
Nobody with a raised hand.
Okay, then we'll move on to our business part of the meeting. And I'll just describe the process. I'll call an item for consideration and staff will describe what their request is and what their analysis and findings and recommendations are. And following that, we will open the we will have the applicant speak if they have anything to say. And then following that, we'll open to the public and for public comment. And following that, we'll vote to approve, deny, possibly table, maybe modify things if we think it's appropriate. And as we go through it, we're guided by the LUDC, the Land Use and Development Code. We don't change the code. We don't make changes to the rules. We interpret what's in there and make our decisions based on that. And so with that, are there any conflicts or ex parte contacts to disclose? I see none. Just for the record, up until about 2 years ago, I had been a member of the Hiawatha Gardens Task Force, and but there's no conflict there, nothing to worry about. So with that, I will call new business major development plan at 10 Old Man's Trail and 487 El Paso Boulevard, Hiawatha Gardens. And
Thank you, Chair Delwich. Chelsea Royston for the record. And, excuse me. So I will be representing the planning department as a presenter for this case. We do have planner Erin Ringsred here as the project manager as well, and she'll be speaking on behalf of the applicants as well as some of the consultants here. So first we will run through our presentation as normal. The Hiawatha Gardens Major Development Plan includes several components: an open air pavilion out of the existing historic building, a public restroom, which is new construction, a parking lot, which is new construction, and a pedestrian plaza, which is new construction. So the major development plans go through administrative review and comment. City Planning Commission will make a recommendation to City Council, and City Council will hold a public hearing and make final decision over the major development plan. We have carefully coordinated all of the applications so that the major development plan public hearing at City Council will coincide with the same meeting as the public hearings and second readings for the rezoning ordinance and the right-of-way vacation ordinance. Those were heard during first reading last night at City Council, and the public hearing has been sent for October 21st, 2025. The material change of appearance certification was heard by the Historic Preservation Commission last Wednesday, October 1st, and was approved. And we also have a major subdivision that is an administrative review that has, it's closely intertwined with the right-of-way vacation and rezoning. And so though the major subdivision is within administrative purview by the planning director, it has not quite been approved and won't be unless and until those other applications are approved. After that point, we will be reviewing the grading permit, and Pikes Peak Regional Building Department will be reviewing any building plans. So here we have our little progress marker with all of our check marks, show just how far we've come on these applications. And as a reminder, the City Planning Commission is guided by the LUDC, as Chair Delwich mentioned, as well as the comprehensive plan. And then there are all various parts of the LUDC that will apply to this project. And I will go into depth on those. So jumping into the application, here is the existing 2 parcels that comprise the Hiawatha Gardens property. This board previously saw the right-of-way vacation and rezoning for the property. Those 2 items were forwarded with a recommendation of approval from City Planning Commission to City Council. And they would effectively consolidate the lots into one whole platted lot, which is required as a prerequisite for any building permits. It would also realign the platted right-of-way for Old Man's Trail to encompass the Old Man's Trail improvements. So the developed right-of-way or the developed roadway would fall within the platted right-of-way as a result of the approval of those applications. Here is a sort of sketch view of the major development plan. We'll go into more detail about the different components. So for major development plan, we require the development review application, a letter of explanation, a tier 3 geologic hazards evaluation, landscape plan and irrigation plan, a drainage report, an ecological characterization study, and a photometric plan. So we'll be reviewing all of the approval criteria for major development plans, which are criteria 1 through 9, with criteria number 5 having subsections 1 through 12. So I will go into those in detail through each of them. The first criteria requires general conformance with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and the policies adopted by city council. I've outlined all of the goals and policies that staff feels are supported by this application and by this project. If anyone has any questions about those, we can go into detail in during the discussion portion. The second criteria requires that the details of the use, the site design, building location, scale, and orientation are compatible and harmonious with the surrounding neighborhood, buildings, and uses. So here we have a snapshot of our current zoning. Again, this is currently in the rezone process to rezone it from commercial, which is bright red, to public facilities, which is blue. There aren't any public facilities zoned parcels on in immediate adjacency, at least not on the updated plat. However, the parcels to the south and to the west are both public owned parcels. To the west is Memorial Park, it's zoned park. To the south is what it was previously developed with the Chase Bank, which is being reused as a mobility hub. The parcels to the north in gold are general residential. A couple of those are vacant. And then the parcels to the east are also zoned commercial and developed with multifamily residential. It's staff's opinion that the design of the site was it is harmonious with the surrounding neighborhood. I think I get into it more further on down our presentation, but yeah, we'll jump into this first. The third criteria requires that the project meet dimensional standards applicable to the zone district, such as building setbacks, building height, building area, and other applicable dimensional standards. The public facility zone requires a 10-foot front setback, which would apply to El Paso Boulevard and Old Man's Trail. It does comply with both of those. The maximum building height is 30 feet. The new restroom facility would comply with that. And the maximum lot coverage is 75%. And the design does comply with that as well. Criteria 4, proposed grading, drainage, flood protection, stormwater quality, and stormwater mitigation complies with the applicable sections of the LUDC. So on this diagram, you can see where the floodplain lies on the site. And this really informed how the site would be reused in order to limit the amount of risk that comes with developing in the floodplain, and just kind of life safety issues. The historic dance hall was opted to be repurposed as an open air pavilion. There are historic documents that support that as a previous iteration of the dance hall. And so it was supported by the Historic Preservation Commission to be reused as such. The existing wooden floor will be removed and replaced with a concrete slab floor that will tie into the subterranean foundation, which helps to support some concrete columns, which then support the roof. So adding that concrete floor really adds a lot of strength and stability against any sort of tensions on the site through floodplain, seismic, geologic hazards, things like that. The new restroom facility was designed to sit outside of that flood zone to avoid the city needing to make alterations to the floodplain, which would be very costly. The parking lot then was kind of split into two sections, with the smaller parking area to the northwest of the site, encompassing the electric vehicle charging stations that were recently installed. And then the larger parking area to the east of the historic dance hall will be the primary parking lot. There are ADA accessible spaces in both parking areas. And the walkway between the new restroom and the historic dance hall will also be ADA compliant. So that will really allow a lot of inclusive movement throughout the site and will help to shield the impacts of the parking lot from both rights of way as well as adjacent land uses. It kind of adds buffer and takes it away from the Old Man's Trail right away and therefore away from Memorial Park. So by shifting the parking lot to the other side of the dance hall, it can minimize any perceived externalities. Criteria number 5, this is the one that has all the sub-criteria, where we look at the development standards for the public facility zone district, where the code was silent on development standards for the public facility zone. Staff recommended that the project team lean towards the commercial standards, as that would be more stringent requirements on the site. And so it would really create a more user-friendly environment. So for exterior lighting, and that is the photometric plan that limits the amount of illumination on the site, as well as the type of fixtures. They are all full cutoff, and they do comply with our photometric requirements, so that complies. For the fencing and retaining wall, a small deficiency was found in the plan, and staff recommends a condition of approval for that criteria, stating that railing locations will be finalized as part of the grading and erosion control plan to install a railing wherever the wall height exceeds 30 inches adjacent to a pedestrian walkway. So basically there, I think it was one location where we thought there might need to be a railing that it didn't show up on the plan, but we felt that that could be conditioned as part of the approval. The next section, oh, and excuse me, there are several subsections that don't appear as part of this list, and that's because they don't apply. They're either residential standards or otherwise don't apply to the site. So what you see here are the standards that do apply to the Hiawatha Gardens site specifically. So subsection 6 is for landscaping and screening. There is a very detailed review for landscaping and fencing that was uploaded as part of the packet, detailing all of the plants that are required, as well as kind of outlining the requirements that landscaping be retained or replaced when it is removed due to construction. So all of those calculations were provided in a separate document as part of the application package. Let the record show that at 5:52 p.m., Commissioner Latimer joined us. All right. So staff does recommend 2 conditions of approval for the landscaping and screening. The first is that a perimeter zone with a minimum width of 5 feet of inorganic matter shall be placed on the eastern edge of the pavilion. That just isn't part of the plan right now, but due to fire mitigation and life safety requirements, staff recommends that as a condition of approval to be compliant with code. And number 2, that the required number of shrubs and ornamental grasses shall be shown on the final landscape plan. those were left off, I believe to aid in clarity of the design, but the final landscape plan would show the required, I think it was 98 shrubs and ornamental grasses throughout the site. Subsection 7, alternative energy and green infrastructure. This complies. And subsection 10, development in natural hazard areas. This complies, as well as the drainage plans in subsection 11. And for subsection 12, for signs are not currently proposed, though in the future, if any sign permits were required, they would need to comply as well. So then backing out to the major development plan approval criteria. Criteria number 6, the project preserves, protects, integrates, and mitigates impacts to any identified sensitive or hazardous natural features associated with the site. The site has been designed to link closely with Fountain Creek and to mitigate any potential adverse impacts on the creek from the parking area. So I've shown here a portion of the landscape plan that shows the landscape buffer and rain gardens that will separate the parking area from the creek. There was a full ecological characterization study that was submitted as part of the application package. And that indicated that this development plan would have very minimal impacts to the ecology of Fountain Creek throughout the site. I've combined the next 3 on one slide. Criteria number 7, the project connects or extends adequate public utilities to the site. Water and sewer utilities will be extended to the restroom facility. Number 8, if necessary, it would include roadway and intersection improvements. A traffic study was not required for this phase of the project due to an overall reduction in parking spaces. Approximately 41 parking spaces will be reduced as part of this development to make way for other improvements such as the pedestrian plaza and the restroom. And number 9, significant offsite impacts that are reasonably anticipated as a result of the project are mitigated or offset to the extent proportional and practicable. Impacts may include, but are not limited to, scale, shadowing, parking, light, odor, and noise. Throughout this whole process, staff has heard through informal comments rather than any sort of written documentation that the neighboring community is concerned about the potential impacts of additional traffic on El Paso Boulevard. And staff has determined that the reduction in parking spaces will help mitigate those traffic concerns. The addition of landscaping along the perimeter of the lot and throughout the site will aid in reducing glare and noise generated by the use. And further, the construction of permanent restroom facilities to replace the temporary restrooms will reduce odor and will increase the aesthetic of the site. So just to reiterate those proposed conditions, should the Planning Commission find it appropriate to recommend approval of the major development plan, staff recommends the conditions that the railing locations will be finalized wherever a wall height exceeds 30 inches adjacent to a pedestrian walkway. Number 2, a perimeter zone with a minimum of 5 feet of inorganic matter shall be placed on the eastern edge of the pavilion. And number 3, the requisite number of shrubs and ornamental grasses of 98 will be shown on the final landscape plan. And this concludes staff's presentation.
Okay, thanks. So it's time for any questions for staff before we go to the applicant. And just a clarification with as far as this is a quasi judicial item here. The next item is not. So when we get to voting, since we already seated Megan and we're 20 minutes into the presentation, she'll be the voting member, and then Commissioner Latimer can participate comment-wise, but not vote. I think that's a policy we've always had for late arrivals.
Thank you for that clarification.
So questions for staff?
So, excuse me, I think my biggest question or concern is when you say, when you're removing 41 parking spaces and saying that does not, that that's a that the surrounding neighborhood wouldn't be impacted, those 41 folks will still show up and want a place to park. And so I don't see how that is a positive and that it's not mitigated anywhere. You lose 41 spaces. Those are typically full, I think, just about every day during the summer, at least definitely on weekends. And so that's a question. I guess in part, the master plan talks about parking, and it's obviously not we don't have an abundance of it. So that's my biggest concern on this, that you're
Okay.
taking away 41 spaces and it's not properly
Yeah.
mitigated in the
Yeah.
plan.
Okay, so is that a question for staff or just a comment?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, when we get to this, when we get to the
It is a question, I'm sorry.
okay, what is your question then?
Well, the question is how are the lack of the removing 41 spaces really comply with the whole master plan that we have in regard to parking?
Thank you. So, the proposed use and, it doesn't necessarily get into the specific number of parking spaces in the comprehensive plan or in the transportation and mobility master plan. However, a number of those, policies and goals in both plans are supported by this, as well as, supplemented with other parking facilities that are being developed throughout town, such as, the Duck Stop and the Dillon Mobility Hub. That's been typically the kind of plan for supplementing any perceived losses at this site.
Yeah, I'll just throw in there, the other factor is what we had up to now is the preliminary use of the property, and we've gone through this major process, a lot of public engagement, and also our land use and development code was very specific about expectations for landscaping and, not just having a big heat island of asphalt. And that was very articulated over and over again as we went through processes for parking and in discussions, all the community engagement, council work sessions and so on, that they wanted to have a lot of that. So just in a nutshell, I think they're really following the code by doing this. And Gary.
That and the other, the process by which the Hiawatha Gardens is going to be redone is that they're going to retrain, because you're shutting that whole parking lot down and everyone's going to the new Dillon Mobility Hub. And the thought was that all those people who used to park there are going to learn about the Mobility Hub, relearn new behaviors, because it's going to be down for quite some time. And then when it reopens, that, they'll just acclimate to the new size of it, was the thoughts that I heard.
I believe there's also a strategic pricing mechanism to help encourage diversifying parking for users.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, now would the applicant like to speak?
Aaron, do you want to stay over there so they can?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Byron Zick. I'm with Davis Partnership Architects. I'm here on behalf of the architecture team.
And Justin DiPietro, also with Davis Partnership Architects, landscape architect on the team.
And Aaron, do you want to lead this?
Yes, my name is Erin Ringsred. I am a planner, landscape architect, but tonight I'm appearing as the project manager for the Hiawatha Gardens project. We do have a brief presentation we'll kind of run you through. This was previously presented in a little bit of a different form to council in August of this year, but I wanted to kind of just share some of the overarching strategies. They're present in the documents that you reviewed, but this kind of gives a little bit more color to them, whereas you were looking at more construction document type drawings. So when we approached this project, we looked at it we're looking at it in two phases in terms of implementation. Phase one is improving the restroom and parking lot structure. And we looked at this from a sustainability perspective, a parking perspective, as well as mobility, and then art and community, and what services needed to be added at the restroom. So for the sustainable stormwater plan, the existing condition there is, there's really nothing that is slowing down water before it enters the creek. So it's just a sheet flow into the creek. And we want to make sure we're improving the runoff water quality before it reaches Fountain Creek. So we're looking at that using green infrastructure strategies, as well as being cognizant of that 100-year floodplain. We've reduced the impervious surface on the site by 23%, and we're working with the existing drainage patterns. This helps us just work with how things currently want to roll on the site, but also that's a cost-saving strategy as well, so you're not regrading the whole thing, and it allows us to tie into the existing pavilion. And then we're also looking at this in terms of life cycle costs for our community. So when we talk about snow removal, when we're looking at maintenance for our staff, where is that snow going to be pushed to? How can that also be incorporated into how it melts and is then filtered before it enters the creek? The largest infrastructure item for the green infrastructure is located on the south side of the lot. Again, that's working with the existing drainage patterns to put a rain garden and filtration system there. And we've divided this into kind of two strategies. One is this flow through planters that helps filter that water, and then the rain garden there on the south side. You can also see there's two different spots for snow storage where they'll push the snow to really help that process along, as well as the red outline here is where that 100-year floodplain is. And we just have to be sensitive with how we're treating water in the 100-year floodplain in a way that's different than the rest of the site. And then the parking strategy, where we've gone through multiple iterations of the parking layout. One of the major things was wanting to make sure we're reducing our impact to existing trees. Right now, some of that existing pavement is very close to existing trees. So we do have to take that out, and there's some disturbance there and some trees proposed as being removed as part of the major development plan. But we really played with that layout so that we could provide the maximum amount of parking with the least amount of impervious surface, and reduce the encroachment on things like top of bank and our existing tree buffer on the east side. A previous design would have required the retaining wall on the east. So that was another thing we kind of looked at, was how are we working with our topography to not have costly infrastructure on the site like a retaining wall. And previous layouts hadn't fully incorporated some of like our landscape standards, our buffers, our landscape islands, as well as like parking lot dimensions that are preferred, and also respond to kind of the types of vehicles that people are coming here in. There's not oversized parking on this lot. We are anticipating that is being moved to other areas in town. And again, that's kind of part of that retraining, that they're going to be accommodated elsewhere and not here. But we also don't have any compact parking spaces on this site because we don't see a lot of compact users coming to this site either. And really, back to kind of that impervious versus pervious surface, we wanted to, the landscape standards really encourage that. And we wanted to make sure we're, being the best stewards, maybe taking that a step further where possible. And this is a view showing the proposed restroom structure on the west side. And then the south side is that transition down to the pavilion, and then looking east to where the parking lot will be. So existing parking is about 140 stalls, give or take, with 11 ADA spots. The new parking lot would have 96 stalls, which is those six ADA stalls are part of that total. And they're going to be located in the areas outlined in red here. One ADA spot is up here as an EV charging station. One is on the south side of that arm, so that provides kind of immediate access there. And then ADA parking east of the restroom with a larger block of 4 spots, having van accessible as well as a standard. And then the other layer of this is really taking the next steps in terms of increasing mobility at Hiawatha. So choosing infrastructure for bike parking stations that can be scalable as demands grow, making sure we're putting those near decision points so that we get more people to kind of leave their car and visit multiple destinations in town as opposed to trying to park near each of their destinations. And recognizing that there are many users of non-standard bikes so that any infrastructure we're providing is accommodating those bikes as well. And then on the site, we do have some grade changes that we're navigating. At first, the site maybe feels pretty flat, but as you get into it, there are some grade changes that we wanted to navigate in a way that was an equal experience for all different mobility needs. So we're really looking at accessibility along those pathways as well. And this shows a zoomed in portion of the area north of the existing pavilion, where there's almost a 5-foot grade change or a little over 5-foot grade change between El Paso Boulevard and the pavilion. So we're navigating those in terms of different landings. There is a formal ramp on the north side of the restroom structure because that is such a steep grade transition there, as well as a stair. But the rest of that would be accomplished through like graded pathways, slopes, as opposed to a formal ramp, which requires railings, et cetera, whenever possible. We maintain, as part of the grant funding, the EV charging stations on the northwest corner here, identified there. And then we're providing bike parking around this restroom facility as a destination that people maybe are coming to the site to use, or they're parking here and utilizing Memorial Park. And then bike lockers has been something we've heard from a lot of the mobility users in town wanting a safer place to lock up their bikes. So we'll start with a few of those, assess, how frequently they're used, and again, can kind of scale that up in different ways as possible moving forward. And then art and community, something we heard throughout the community engagement process on this project was really that we wanted opportunities for it to feel like Manitou. We wanted opportunities for the citizens of Manitou to be using these spaces. So in order to further that goal, we did collaborate with Crane to identify kind of a master plan of opportunities for where art can go within these spaces in terms of thinking about views to and from them, as well as materials that we can use to make it easier to receive them in the future. So for example, the restroom structure is going to have stucco on the exterior of it so that it is ready to receive a mural at such time as we receive a grant for that in the future. So it's not having to be reclad or rethought. As well, we've also provided different scales of gathering spaces. So it's not just the pavilion. We're trying to create little nodes within the design as a whole. And then art through pollinator plant species, and looking at this landscape and this increase to our pervious surfaces as an opportunity for storytelling about some of our plant communities within this area as well. So here's a plan where we're highlighting different opportunities. We have seat walls throughout the site that could be used for an embedded mosaic opportunity in the future, mural opportunity at the restroom with those bike lockers. They could have art added to them as well over time. Really wanting this to be phased and layered, because I personally just think that adds a little more of like an eclectic nature to the site, and then trying to do it all at once, so that there's room for that expression to come through over time. The pavilion and plaza is phase 2. So that is a restoration of the pavilion to kind of that original open air pavilion from the late 1800s for the site, and really restabilizing that structure to accommodate our current code requirements for wind loading, the potential for flooding, et cetera. We're utilizing, the same set of strategies here. I'll kind of run through how they apply to this section of the site with sustainability, mobility, and art and community. So here, this whole portion, other than the pavilion, was previously impervious surface. So we've really incorporated more pervious surfaces to provide for infiltration in this zone. And then working with our existing drainage patterns. This is part of us meeting our flood compliance, our floodplain requirements, because this is a 100-year flood. And throughout the design process, we've been working with our MS4 permit reviewers and our floodplain administrator to make sure that everything that we're proposing is kind of, as we're refining it, is working towards that and eliminating any surprises. We heard as part of community engagement that there's a desire to kind of interact with that creek more and have more access. So to that end, we are proposing kind of a terracing system along the edge here. The last wall that you see adjacent to the creek is still that same existing wall that we have there, because that limits our kind of cost, but also enhances that access and makes that access ADA compliant. And so this is what that plaza, what this sort of park becomes, with a lawn area adjacent to the pavilion, a sidewalk going along that edge, which provides that inorganic buffer on the west side, which will mimic on the east side, maybe in a different material, but a similar goal of hazard mitigation. And then increasing this area where the plaza is by 73% for a pervious surface, where previously it was primarily impervious surface. And then mobility and circulation, we have a lot of that same infrastructure happening here in the plaza space. So we have the node on the west side, so there's that visibility to Old Man's Trail, to Memorial Park for that parking infrastructure, utilizing slopes instead of ramps to navigate the grade as much as possible, as much as the grading allows, and providing that equal access, equal circulation throughout the site to all of our users with different mobility concerns. And then again, we collaborated with Crane to identify opportunities here. And this is where you have a few more of our gathering spaces as we get into the heart of this plaza design. We've identified some opportunities for more interactive art as play, and again, really folding in our pollinator plant species. So here's a view looking south, where we see that active lawn area, the potential for art as a play element, both within the lawn and having access from the sidewalk, again, to make that interactive for all of our different user groups. And then this plan shows where we see opportunities for those art pieces in the future, both as sculpture, as interactive, as mural or mosaic on the walls or on the bike lockers. And then this is the final view looking back north, again, of that central gathering space where we have kind of these bump outs along the edge that give, more conversational spaces. You grab your coffee and kind of hang out here in the morning or something like that. So that's just the overall sort of strategy, adding a little more color and illustration to the project than what was in, construction document set. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Any questions? It looks great.
Love the bike lockers.
Thanks.
Okay. Now, do you have anything to add, or are you just here to answer questions?
Just here to support and answer questions as we can.
Okay. I think you've sold us, so it looks like.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so with that, I guess we're done with the presentation and we're at the public comment portion. I don't see anybody in the audience. There's one attendee and I don't see any hands raised. So I guess we'll close the public hearing, the public comment portion of the hearing. And we're here to deliberate.
Thought you guys did a great job on the presentation. It was well explained and well illustrated. Good job.
Well,
I'd say the same, and I appreciate really the diversity of ideas that were brought into the process, the arts as well as the thinking ahead to how people with different mobility issues may be able to use it. And I am wondering what the plan will be for oversized parking at some point.
Yeah, oversized parking, we're trying to encourage users with RVs and things like that to park at the Dillon Mobility Hub or in some of those larger parallel spots on Manitou Avenue east of the site. So that's currently what has been worked with for the parking department.
okay.
Just a question, how many spaces are at Dillon for regular cars?
That's not something I know off the top of my head. I'm not as intimately familiar with the Dillon.
I guess the parking, I'm still hung up on that it doesn't mitigate losing 41 spaces. I understand what you're saying, retraining. Yeah, and the plans are beautiful. All that looks great, but I just feel like parking is so critical that I don't think it adequately addresses losing 41 spaces.
My sense from, following council meetings over the last couple of years, the plan was to push parking to other parts of town rather than, have it all concentrated there. I think there's hope that the Dillon will be sort of the jumping off space for things like the incline. That's one of the big consumers of the parking lot in the, cooler parts of the day in the summer. And so the thinking is to push that out. And then it's less people just, driving into the center of town. It's less traffic. So it's a strategy. I don't think it's a negative so much as a plan. And that's sort of, that's sort of been the kind of the findings from all the community engagement and deliberations. This is what this council has really articulated over and over. So
Excuse me. There are 91 spaces currently available at the Dillon.
and it's really, it's like, it was made really clear. We had this public process that went on for a couple of years. And one of the things that came up over and over, especially from those in town who were really, they have a holistic view of our community. They wanted not just to have pavement. The idea is to, integrate nature in there and think about the runoff in the creek and so on. And I think this is one of the solutions.
I would also like to add that though there is a huge increase in impervious area, that's kind of towing the line. And if we were to add more paving, there's a very real possibility that a variance for lot coverage would be required. And I think that is something that this commission would have a very hard time granting.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And it's like it's kind of like, I think the feeling is that the city can't have a do as I say, not as I do type of vibe. It's like we model the behavior we expect. If there's any other commercial development, we can't, say, oh, you have to have consideration for our code and follow these guidelines, but we won't. So it's like, we have to model the behavior we expect our community to have. So, would anybody like to entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion and recommend approval of the major development plan at 10 Old Man's Trail and 487 El Paso Boulevard based upon the findings that the request meets the review criteria for granting a major development plan as set forth in City Code 18.06.4.13 with the staff's conditions.
I'll second that. Okay. Is there any more discussion? Okay, then we can vote. All those in favor? And I see Megan's hand is up, so
Um,
Megan? Oh,
sorry, Commissioner Latimer, I believe you voted, but I thought we were gonna have Commissioner Day be the voting member on this item.
yeah, and Megan, I see your hand was up. I assume that was voting.
Yes, that was voting in favor.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
this motion. Oh. Okay, okay, there's a recommendation to council and 6-1. So, thank you. And,
Thank you.
okay, and we'll move on to the next item of business is Title 18 miscellaneous code revisions.
I'm hopping on Zoom so I can show my PowerPoint.
And for this item, just to clarify again for the record, Commissioner Latimer will be a voting member if a vote is called. Is that, though I don't believe that this is,
Yeah, I guess we can do that.
thank you.
Okay, yes, no, this is a working session. It's not a public hearing, so no vote, no decision will be made. But hope to have discussion, dialogue, and in terms of where we go with this. So this is just a work session for miscellaneous code revisions. Now that we have the ADUs out of the way, there are a number of other code revisions that the Planning Commission had discussed and some other miscellaneous things that we do need to clean up. And so we'll be getting into that as we get farther into this exercise. Right now, what I wanted to do was introduce two things that I know the Planning Commission was interested in looking at or reviewing. That was variances, the variance section and variance criteria, and then residential zoning densities, or the density restrictions or density standards that we have in our residential zone in our residential zoning districts, and for residences that are built in our commercial zoning districts. So I wanted to start with those two things and basically start off the discussion. I have some ideas on next steps after we're done with tonight, but I wanted to kick this off and see where the discussion takes us. So with code revisions, I'll start with variances. Oops. Okay, there we go. Now we're on presentation. So the first thing that we'll talk about are variances. And I included some information about what the municipal code currently says about currently says about our variances. And I started, what I have up here on the presentation is first the purpose. Let me get this out of the way. So just as kind of an overall overview, for purpose, the Planning Commission has the authority to vary or modify the application of the requirements of the Land Use Development Code, not related to use, so that the spirit of the Land Use Development Code is observed when strict application of this LUDC will deprive a property of the privileges enjoyed by other properties of the same zoning classification. Also includes, says that state and federal laws or requirements may not be varied by the city. And of course, we don't have the authority to vary state and federal laws either. So we just have the authority to grant variances that as per the municipal code. One thing that I wanted to point out here is in the second sentence, not related to use. So the code allows planning commissions to grant variances to the code to, I believe, anything that's in the code as long as it's not related to use. So it doesn't allow the planning commission to issue or to grant what we call a use variance. Generally, what that means is if there's a list of uses or there's a set of uses that are allowed in a particular zoning district. For example, in the low density residential zoning district allows for specific residential uses. Somebody cannot come in and request a variance for a commercial use in that residential use. So that's what we mean by a use variance. There are some communities that do allow use variances. Manitou Springs does not. The communities that I've worked with before here have not allowed use variances. That can get kind of touchy. Really, if somebody's looking at a different use that's not allowed by the zoning district, probably the more appropriate way to address that is to seek a rezoning or to go through that rezoning process to see if a rezoning of the property is supported by the regulations and by the comprehensive plan. But currently, that's the one thing that somebody in Manitou cannot request a variance for. And then down on the second part, I indicated on 18.06.4.2. The Planning Commission may authorize variances from the requirements of this chapter. So that's pretty broad. Not related to use. Additionally, variances are not available to allow a use that is not permitted in a particular zone district, as I had said, and a variance shall be considered an extraordinary remedy. So, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah, a variance is considered granting relief for a property owner, granting relief from the strict interpretation of the code under what I think a lot of laws say extraordinary circumstances, and I'll get into that in couple other pages of my presentation. But first, I'll just wanted to go through the current approval criteria for that we have in our code. So we indicate no variance shall be authorized unless Planning Commission finds that all of the criteria have been met. And so there's two criteria that a variance must meet. Number one, the variance shall not result in development of areas at risk of natural hazards unless adequate mitigation is provided. So what this does is allow us to verify that where the variance is proposed is not in an area at risk of natural hazards, and assure that either adequate mitigation is provided or the variance avoids that natural hazard area or that risk of natural hazard area. And then number two, no adverse impact should result or shall result on adjacent properties. I'll get into that a little bit more, but that's one of those sort of subjective criteria that Planning Commission must find, a lot of that is going to be based on what public comments. So if you do get comments from adjacent property owners that there's going to be an adverse impact, for example, you can use that to help you determine whether number 2 has been complied with or not. And then after that, as you know, you have 6 other criteria, and that the variance request must meet at least a minimum of 4 of those 6 criteria. The first two, the first two are actually sort of related, and I'll get into why. But the first one was suffer unnecessary hardship. This is something that comes around in variance criteria quite a bit. Is there a hardship? Is there an unnecessary hardship or an undue hardship that keeps a property owner from developing their property the way it was intended to, or in a way that the regulations intended for it to be developed? Which hardship is not generally applicable to other lands or structures in the same zoning in the same zone district because of the unusual configuration of the applicant's property boundaries? So is it configured in such a way, for example, or are there unique circumstances? The second one, the question is, are there any design alternatives or alternative locations for structures that would eliminate the need for the requested variance or would reduce the amount of the variance required? So this requires you to ask, is there an alternative location for that would allow somebody to develop? Actually, from my perspective, if you look at that, if there is an alternative location, then there probably is not an unnecessary hardship. And so that's where numbers 1 and 2 kind of come together. And you could possibly consider both of those kind of one and the same. Number 3, the enforcement of the provisions of the LUDC deprives the applicant the rights enjoyed by a majority of the other properties. Again, we're getting back to that. Does the hardship unduly impact the property? Number 4, the need for the variance is not the result from actions of previous property owners, or is there otherwise a self-imposed hardship? Just from my perspective and my experience, I've not seen that the need for variance from as a result of actions of previous property owners. A lot of times, other communities will focus more on the self-imposed hardship. Was there something that the current property owner did that got them into this predicament or got them into this hardship that would be self-imposed? And then the other number 5, talking about is there a disability affecting the owners or tenants of the property or any member of the family of an owner or tenant who resides on the property, which impairs the ability of the disabled person to utilize or access the property? I was talking with our attorney a little bit before this just to verify. You see this in some criteria that's actually related to the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. And what you want to make sure is that there is nothing in the code this gives you relief and provides relief in cases where if the code happens to put the city in a quandary where you're violating the ADA or the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this would provide relief or give the city the ability to provide relief to allow that and make sure that we're not in conflict with ADA. And then number 6, the variance request is required in order to preserve contributing structure in a historic district, and that's something I haven't seen that before, but my perception, that's something obviously that's very important to the city of Manitou, to assure that that the regulations do not prevent the preservation of a contributing structure in a historic district. So if I'm getting too wonky, I apologize, but the next couple slides are excerpts from other places where, to kind of put variances in perspective. I found this information from Colorado Revised Statutes. It doesn't apply to the city specifically, but what I like about it is I think it helps focus the purpose of the variance, or the purpose of when a variance is requested. And I underlined that, is there a peculiar and exceptional practical difficulty, number one, or is there an exceptional or undue hardship upon the owner of such property that keeps them from being able to do what the zoning and what the regulations would otherwise allow them to do? And then after that, if there is, and if a variance is warranted, does the variance, or does the relief, if the variance is granted, will it do it without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of the code? And so that's where you're talking about, if you're granting the variance, is there gonna be a detriment to the public good, or to the general public, or to adjacent property owners, adjacent properties, or the neighborhood? So to put that a little bit more succinctly, I look at that, would the strict application result in exceptional and undue hardship, or peculiar and exceptional difficulty? If yes, and if a variance is warranted, would granting that variance do so, again, without substantial detriment to the public good, adjacent properties, neighborhood, general public, and without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of the code? And very quickly, to repeat that again, this is an excerpt. This is some information. It's in one of the attachments that I provided in the packet, but some information from the American Planning Association, Planning Advisory Service, that 4 basic common general criteria for granting variances is, again, going back to the public interest, is the variance not contrary to the public interest? Are there special conditions that exist that pertain to the parcel? Would the literal or the strict enforcement of the variance, I guess enforcement of the code, I should say, of the code, would result in unnecessary hardship? And is the spirit of the ordinance of the code observed and justice is done? So let's see. Oh, let me go back. So I think you can identify most of those things, or I can identify most of those things in the current criteria in one way or the other. I think if the Planning Commission wanted to, we could possibly do a little bit of streamlining in that criteria and make it a little bit more succinct in how it's outlined out, as well as providing those exceptions that are important to the city, including that exception to assure ADA compliance, as well as exceptions to contributing structures in the historic district. Let me stop right there. And are there any questions or anything that anybody has right now?
I don't have questions, but I have comments.
Okay.
Ready?
Yes.
I just want to let everybody know where I'm coming from. I believe that and I'm going to go by some notes so I can stay on track. I believe that I have a unique opportunity to contribute to today's discussion because I'm the only member on the commission who has been an applicant under the current LUDC, as far as I know. So I'd like to make a couple of points on a suggestion. In fact, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't advocated for change in the LUDC. 2 years ago, I approached Alan at a public meeting and complained about a requirement that my wife and I had to meet and had met in order to have our plans for our new home approved. Alan responded by asking if I would be interested in serving on the commission, and he told me about openings coming up. So I wouldn't be here if I hadn't complained and wanted to advocate for change. So in a way, I'm expressing my biases, that I'm in favor of change that balances things out and treats applicants better. So I'm going to make a couple of specific but general points.
And this is related to variances.
To variances,
Okay.
absolutely. I know that complaint wasn't about variance, but this is. So I'm going to make a couple of points. Applicants don't start by thinking, I'm suffering from a hardship, I think I'll do something about it. Applicants start with a positive idea, making something better, improving appearance, function, access, etc. They bring the idea to the planning department and are told of the variance criteria, but also that their positive reasons for the plan will not be taken into account. That's my view of it. We were even told in our legal training not to consider whether we consider the application to be a good idea. I don't think that's the way it should be, and I think we can make changes in the language of this section of the LUDC to allow us to take that into account. Second point, and Alan, I'm going to quote something that I overheard you say to another commissioner that I don't think you'll be upset about my quoting you because it's consistent with what you've said before. You said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, if commissioners don't vote according to the law, to the LUDC, then what's the point of having a commission? To me, there's a flip side to that, which is what's the point of having human beings on the commission rather than robots or ChatGPT if we are not able to use our judgment and wisdom to make the best choice. Bottom line is, I'm advocating for 2 points. Considering applicants' values and wider range to use our own judgment. Now, I know we're going to be talking about the specific criteria that Fred mentioned, but to me, to make the changes that, general changes that I'd like to see, I would suggest changing one sentence in the introductory part of the variance section of the LUDC, specifically approval criteria. You quoted it, Fred. No variance shall be authorized unless the Planning Commission finds that all of the following criteria have been met. To me, that is actually negative and rigid. It doesn't allow us to use our judgment as I'd like to see it. I would change that statement to be more positive. And here's what I would say. A variance may be authorized by the Planning Commission if the Planning Commission finds that all of the listed criteria have been met. In addition, commissioners may take into account their judgment of the benefits and value of a proposal and whether those qualities outweigh any impact of failure to meet a specific requirement. So I'm just, like I said, letting you know where I come from. stating my opinions, and I'd like to hear what other people think.
Okay. Any other questions or comments based on Fred's thing before we? I mean,
I have just one, please. Fred, there was a phrase that kind of caught me, peculiar and exceptional difficulties. And I wonder, are there examples of that, or is that to be arbitrary to the commission? I'm trying to imagine what that might be.
I think there's lots of different examples. And each property will probably have a different example with talking about peculiar difficulties.
Is it as in geography or?
Yeah, yeah, usually it involves,
Design, okay.
it involves the, yeah, the geography or the topography of the property or of the, maybe the unusual configuration of the property.
Thank you.
One example, yeah, an example would be like a setback, encroaching into a setback when the property is extremely narrow and you cannot physically put a structure or residence on it because it's so narrow.
okay. Anyone else? Okay.
So just to kind of address my takeaway from what Commissioner Rosenthal just said, I think I, wish that we had a more positive outlook on things in general. But to me, I think you do have to start with variances coming from a place of restriction, in the sense that it is by definition, you're asking for a deviation from the code and the zoning code that exists currently. So I think you have to start from that point. That what is allowed under the code is permissive, and then variances by nature, I think, are deviations. They should be restrictive and used minimally. I also think that there's some concern with getting too subjective with this, being that we are quasi-judicial, and I think that opens us up to claims of reaching arbitrary decisions, right? I think to the degree that we can constrain the code so that we can be more objective actually is better. It's better for the community, for openness, and it's better for us to be able to apply the code to a given application. So I want subjectivity sometimes, but I don't know if that's really what's best for the city.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with that. I think that's in earlier times. We've had a number of, over the last 20 years that I've been involved with this, or maybe longer, we've had consultants come in, and variances have always been a topic of controversy. And the planners that have come in have consistently said, you have too many variances. You need to change your code. You need change your zoning, change your dimensional standards, whatever. But if you have so many variances, there's something wrong with the code. And to some degree, I agree with that, but to some degree, I think it's challenging in Manitou because historically we've, there was time when we didn't have any zoning regulations, and, the historic areas, you see that every day. And then we have geographic, geology, topology, steep hills, weird roads that are put in the wrong place. There's all kinds of challenges. But I think the lesson I've gotten over the years is the less subjectivity, the better, because we just open ourselves up to lawsuits. It's like one commission can get all, think, oh yeah, I really like this, and I think we should just ignore our criteria here and just say the value of this is so much better. And I think that's really dangerous and going in the wrong direction.
I know what you're saying, Alan, and I know I'm staking out the other extreme. But I think we can find a middle ground. And right now, I don't think there is one. I
Okay.
think we can find it
Yeah.
by communicating like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we, that's a good thing that we should just
Right.
keep
That's
looking at it.
exactly it.
And I have a couple other things that I'd kind of like to just throw into the mix that I've found frustrating in last year especially. And it's like, number one is, what do we mean by hardship? And I think, Fred, you and I have discussed this a few times, and, it's market conditions are traditionally not considered a hardship. And that was used for a big project as one of the arguments. Oh, it's a hardship. We bought this property and we thought we were going to do something. And now, we can't do it unless we completely blow out the dimensional standards you have for our district, our zone. And I think that's an abuse. And I think a simple clarification in our variance code could fix that. So that's one area. When you look at the four debatable criteria, the 5 and 6 are pretty, the disability or the historic district, those are different. But the other 4, 2 of them talk about hardship. And I think this is an area that we could tighten up. The other area that it's kind of tangential but related to variances is clarification on density. And, arguing that residential density and hospitality density are the same is kind of a abuse. Because, we have this one thing about, oh, am I being denied something that everybody else in the zone district has? And this again was used like, hey, there's a hotel across the street that's got this high density. I should get that same density. And that is, I think, a bogus argument that could be, we wouldn't have to look at that if we would just clarify in the code that they're two different things. We're mixing apples and oranges so it won't get used again. Because I think that was just blatant abuse. And it kind of gives a feel-good vibe if you want to just go ahead and approve something. But I think it was wrong. And I think we need to tighten that up. And that's kind of part of the variance decision.
Okay, good points. Thank you very much. And what I'll do is, my intention is to compile some more information in response to some of these things and bring it back to the next meeting next month or whenever we hold this again to provide some suggestions and thoughts and things like that. And so.
Yeah. Okay. And I see Megan has her hand up, so I'd like to let her weigh in here.
Yeah, are we closing discussion or are there opportunity for a couple more comments?
Oh, no, that's why I want you to speak. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up until just now because I was looking at the presentation.
No worries, no worries. I appreciate the good comments and discussion. And thank you, Commissioner Rosenthal, for sharing your thoughts there too. Like, I think you could have also ended your comments with, well, why do we have variances? Like, certainly that's why we have humans on the planning commission, is to have some level of discretion. But also, why do we have variances unless it's to accommodate things that the code did not consider or did not contemplate? So thanks for those comments, and I would sort of second them, in that there should be room for some level of discretion. I like the approach that the American Planning Association brings forward, that we still have up on the screen here. That seems to still allow for some level of discretion, but make sure that it is in the public interest and provide some guidelines there. So I would support looking into shifting our variance criteria to look more like the American Planning Association guidance. I also want to bring up the point about our code, just like Alan, you were saying. For those of us in the historic areas of the city, and we've seen this on the Planning Commission, there are a lot of folks who have to come and get a variance because our properties are built, our houses, our buildings were not built to comply with our new land use development code, which is a much more sort of sprawling suburban type of development, and downtown and the historic areas of Manitou just weren't built that way. And so there is a sort of unfairness that those of us who are in that historic built environment that the code does not accommodate have to come before the planning commission to get a variance to do the things that we would want to do because we don't comply in the first place. And so we have to get a variance because we don't meet the setback minimums. We don't meet the lot frontage minimums. We don't meet the lot coverage or the density maximums, or the parking requirements, because that is the historic built environment in Manitou that makes it such a special place. And for our code to kind of prevent that type of built environment and force everybody to come before the planning commission for a variance, it speaks to what you were saying, Alan, that maybe there's something wrong with our code. Maybe we should sort of limit the strict criteria that is hard for a lot of folks to meet all those 4 out of 6, I believe. So just some thoughts for further consideration. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. As far as the historic areas go, I think, that might be an area can be done. We're talking about updating the historic district guidelines, I think. Isn't that on the table? That might be an area where some of those challenges could be addressed. Like right now, there's that extra 5 feet of height that you get in the historic district. And, maybe there are other things like that need to be taken into consideration. And I'm just sort of making this up as I go, but certainly I hope you get involved, you participate when we do the update of the historic district guidelines.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the zoning code and the land use development code too.
No, what I'm trying, I think there's some overlap is what I'm suggesting, that maybe there is some of the things can be addressed in that process too. Like the height thing, you get an extra 5 feet because of the pitched roofs. Maybe there's other things about historically having, the way the streets were laid out, or I don't know. Anyway, I think it's just another area, but yeah, in general, I agree with the challenges.
I'd like to just kind of put a question out there. So one of our current criteria talks about no alternatives. And consistently that has taken into account the alternative of doing nothing. And I kind of wanted to put that out there and see how everyone feels about the null alternative, and whether there's space for a conversation about revising that to say something like no alternatives that achieve the same goal, or something to that effect. I just didn't know where everyone stood currently.
Yeah, I think, what I remember when we were doing the code update, there was, I think at one point I threw out some language about no reasonable alternative. And that was like, wait a minute, you just made it, what's reasonable? How are you going to decide that? It just all of a sudden it opens a can of worms, but I see what, it's like that's been a real tough one. And I know Justin's really pushed back a lot when we've approved variances and there really are alternatives that allow reasonable use of the property. Justin, you've taught us on that a few times.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and thank you for bringing that up, Chelsea. To me, I think there is room to maybe rephrase that criterion. I think it causes some trip ups, and whose definition of reasonable? Is it the applicant's? From my perspective, and I don't blame them for it, the applicant's always going to ask for more, yet the word minimum is in that criterion. So I think there's already this inherent struggle between the two. We're approaching it from a minimum perspective. They're trying to maximize their use. But in nowhere in that criterion do I see the word maximize or most economic benefit, et cetera, right? So they're approaching it from one way inherently differently than the way I think we're viewing it as a commission as a whole, perhaps. So there's probably room to, I think, rephrase that. I apologize, I don't have any suggested language tonight, but I think it would serve a lot of us to have that cleared up for the applicant and for the commission. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the intent was to just kind of get some initial thoughts tonight and come back with some more concrete ideas.
And if there's nothing else, we can move on to the next topic.
Yeah, let's do that. We can always come back to this too if we need to. So the other section, this is a little bit smaller section. I don't have as much information on this, but the other topic is residential zoning densities. I included a little bit of information in the packet about our current residential zoning densities. And this can go in a whole bunch of different directions, but currently what I have on the presentation is what are the zoning districts that allow for multiple dwelling units, what those densities are from downtown zoning district to our high density and low density residential zoning districts. So the downtown zoning district, of course, allows for up to 30 dwelling units per acre. The commercial and the mixed use commercial, actually the commercial zoning district is the district that I believe most of the urban, the URA is zoned as well as some of the outer areas beyond the downtown commercial zoning district. That's the maximum density is at 20 dwelling units per acre for that. And then you go down to the general residential, low density and high density residential, and you're getting into the 5 to 15 dwelling units per acre. I think the most recent variance for the multi-family unit complex at the LaFun property was looking at a variance from the 20 dwelling units per acre in the commercial zoning district. And I think that provoked some questions about whether that was an appropriate density for this zoning district or an appropriate density for this area of the city.
Just one quick note on that previous slide. The Hillside Low Density Residential Zone District is not up there because that maximum residential density is determined on the minimum lot size calculation, which is required per specific slopes. So I just wanted to point out that that's not on the list because it has a moving target.
Okay. As a maybe as a parallel or as a comparison, I checked on Colorado Department of Local Affairs website. They have a model land development code. Just went in there to check what the densities were in the model development code. And they're kind of all over the place, and they have a number of different zoning districts that we do not have. But if you look at what they call a flex residential use type or a small residential lot residential use type, they're identifying about 20 or 30 dwelling units per acre. what's interesting is in the land development code, most of the commercial and industrial districts do not even list maximum densities. And that implies to me that the allowance to build, the allowance is to build as dense as possible or as dense as desired within the parameters of any other dimensional restrictions like setbacks or height or any other development standards. There are a few commercial zoning districts in the model land development code that identify maximum densities of around 30 units per acre as a comparison. So for those 30 units per acre and higher are typically what you would see in the model land development code. Now is that, yep, that's the last one. We did not go and look at other communities specifically. We can do that if there's an interest, if the Planning Commission is interested in what other adjacent communities or other communities similar to Manitou have for its commercial zoning districts. We can certainly do that and put a list together for you if you're interested in that. But just from this initial analysis, if we are interested, it looks like there could be room for adding more density in our commercial zoning districts.
It'd be interesting if you could find any community where they had the 30 dwelling units. I mean, this is more for like apartments or condos or?
Yeah, I think my guess is apartments and or condos and any type of residential unit, which would include all of the above.
Okay, because one thing that if anyone's ever up in Denver, you might just try to drive through the Central Park neighborhood, which is like where the old Stapleton Airport was, because there, I think most of that, it's like 20 dwelling units per acre. And it's a lot of single family, basically 2,200 square foot lots. And it's not, I don't know if it would work in our community. Just the thing that I worry about is the wildland urban interface. We're so prone to fire that to have the things that much less open space around in the residential area may be a challenge, but it might fit in some places like, if say one of the trailer park, was redeveloped, maybe that would be a place to have that. And what that would bring up to me is that, wondering about if we should consider having a PU, what is it, a planned unit development section of the code where it can be negotiated for a new project if there's adequate, it's not just like a single lot or two lots or something. And we, historically we had that in our code and we took it out at around 2005. And the thinking then was, oh, we'll never need it. We'll never use it. But
I'd like to take you up on your offer there. I would be curious at what other, I guess, mountain communities, Evergreen or Vail or communities that have similar issues that we do, what they're looking at.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that.
it looks like Megan, sorry, I missed you again.
No, just raised it. So thank you, Fred, for pulling this information and it's a good conversation to have. We basically, at our current land use development code density, maximums have prevented market rate apartments. And so we have not had a new apartment building built in Manitou other than luxury condos in the last 50 years. And so if you look at Vail, you will notice that they have lots of apartments and condos, and they have very tall buildings that are prevented in our code. So that's certainly a mountain community where they allow much greater density. And so I would advocate for removing any density maximum on the commercial district.
Commissioner Day, could you please clarify, do you mean removing that measurement with the intent of essentially allowing a form-based code so that it could be, like it says on the screen here, as dense as the other dimensional standards allow? Or would you advocate for kind of the more restrictive exclusion, which would be, it's not explicitly permitted to be so dense and therefore is prohibited?
The former form-based code approach.
Thank you.
Okay, so sounds good. So we'll get some more information on that to provide some more context and more perspective of what other communities are doing.
Okay. Anything else? Is that it? Or-
That's what we have for now. Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, we have when we get to the point of looking at drafts and looking at like a draft ordinance or revisions and things like that. We also have some more technical minor revisions that we're going to bring to help clean up some things. And so we'll definitely bring those to you so you know what's going on before we hit public hearings.
Yeah, and just, for historical context from the last 2 or 3 years, we've had many public engagements, community engagement as we went through the code update. And the message was loud and clear with the community that we don't want tall buildings. And regardless of what they do in Vail or in Colorado Springs, that message came across very clearly that there's, limits to how far people want to go. So, we need to keep that in mind as we move forward.
To keep those comparisons more helpful to us, could you make those with communities that are similar in size, like, I don't know, Buena Vista, Salida, or mountain towns? I don't think we have that much in common with Vail. Just saying.
Yeah, certainly. Vail's a little bit more complex too. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, any notice of council action or updates?
Yes, just a couple of, if you attended the council meeting last night, you saw that the council held their first reading of the ADU ordinance, the ordinance that Planning Commission had passed last month. So that was their first reading. The second reading is going to be in a couple weeks. The city council, appears to be on board with most of the ordinance. There is some interest from council in seeing an ordinance that does restrict short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units. So we're going to provide that information to city council at the second reading. And the other notification was the entitlements for Hiawatha Gardens that you heard last month also went to city council in first reading yesterday and was approved for second reading as written.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I did watch that whole discussion of the ADUs, and I thought it was interesting when they got into the topic of positioning the ADU behind the main structure. And I don't know if it was prefaced, I may have nodded off, but don't know if they're talking about freestanding ADUs, because there is attached ADUs, basements, all that, and I don't know.
Yeah. Don't know, I already received a draft ordinance from our attorney about what they were requesting last night. So staff is gonna take a look at that and make sure that we provide enough information for council to make make an informed decision and understand what they're doing, depending on how it's written. When we say nothing in the front yard, does that include nothing on the side yards? Is there exceptions? What if it's attached? So there's so many different things. So yeah, we're gonna have to sort that out.
Okay, so it looks like we're at the end here. Let's adjourn.